The CEO who avoided women for 10 years falls for a poor woman who walked into the wrong interview. When Layla Hart, desperate for a job, accidentally barges into CEO Damian King's office, she unwittingly insults him. But instead of being dismissed, she lands an unexpected opportunity, and sparks fly. Will this chance encounter change everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Layla Hart's small apartment as her alarm blared for the third time. She groaned and reached over to silence it, suddenly bolting upright when she saw the time. "No, no, no," she cried, jumping out of bed. "Not today of all days." Layla rushed to the bathroom, splashing water on her face and brushing her teeth in record time. This interview was her last hope. After being laid off from her accounting job 3 months ago, her savings were nearly gone, and the rent was due next week. In the tiny kitchenette, she gulped down coffee while trying to iron her only business skirt. The iron snagged on the fabric, leaving a small burn mark. "Perfect, just perfect," she muttered, examining the damage. There was no time to change. This would have to do. Layla grabbed her folder of resumes, her purse, and rushed out the door. Outside, rain was starting to fall, and the bus she needed was just pulling away from the stop. "Wait!" she shouted, running after it, but the driver didn't see her. Resigned to her fate, Layla pulled out her phone and called for a rideshare, wincing at the cost. Money she didn't have for a job she might not get. By the time she arrived at the gleaming tower of King Enterprises, Layla was 20 minutes late. Her hair was damp from the rain, and her folder of resumes was slightly soggy at the edges. She stared up at the imposing building, its glass exterior reflecting the cloudy sky. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You have to do this." Inside the lobby, she approached the reception desk, trying to look more confident than she felt. "Hi, I'm Layla Hart. I have an interview with HR about the administrative assistant position." The receptionist, a polished woman with perfect makeup, looked at her computer. "You're late, Miss Hart." "I know, I'm so sorry. The bus—" "You'll need to go to the 40th floor," the receptionist interrupted, handing her a visitor badge. "Take the second elevator bank, turn right, and it's the third door on the left." "Thank you so much," Layla said, already hurrying toward the elevators. The ride up to the 40th floor felt endless. Layla tried to fix her hair in the reflection, saw off the elevator doors, straightened her wrinkled skirt, and practiced her smile. When the doors opened, she followed the receptionist's directions, turning right and counting doors. At the third door, she took a deep breath, knocked firmly, and entered. The office she walked into was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, and in the center of it all was a massive desk made of dark wood. Behind it sat a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his face fixed in a slight frown as he looked at his computer screen. This didn't look like an HR office at all. But Layla was too nervous and too desperate to question it. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she began, walking forward and extending her hand. "I'm Layla Hart, here for the interview." The man looked up, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers with obvious surprise. For a moment he seemed about to say something, but Layla, worried he might dismiss her before she had a chance, rushed ahead. "I know I'm not making a great first impression, but I promise you, I'm normally very punctual. The bus drove right past me, and then it started raining, and honestly, this whole morning has been a disaster. But I really, really need this job." She pulled out her resume, slightly wrinkled now, and placed it on his desk. "I have 3 years of administrative experience. I'm great with scheduling and organization, and I learn software systems very quickly. I also make excellent coffee, which I know sounds silly to mention, but my last boss said it was the best he'd ever had in an office." The man still hadn't spoken. He looked from Layla to the resume and back again, his expression unreadable. "Look," she continued, her voice softening, "I know there are probably dozens of applicants who are more qualified and who showed up on time and who don't have a burn mark on their skirt. But none of them will work harder than me. I need this job, and if you give me a chance, I promise I won't let you down." She paused for breath, then added without thinking, And unlike your soulless CEO who's probably never worked a day in his life, I understand what it means to struggle and to earn your way. I respect that. As soon as the words left her mouth, Layla knew she'd made a terrible mistake. This man might not be from HR, but he was clearly an executive of some kind. She just insulted his boss to his face. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "That was completely unprofessional. I didn't mean soulless CEO." The man finally spoke, his voice deep and surprisingly calm. "That's an interesting assessment of someone you've never met." Layla's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have said that. I'm just nervous. And when I get nervous, I talk. Too much. I should go." She reached for her resume, but the man placed his hand on it first. "Sit down, Miss Hart," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Confused but hopeful, Layla sat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he continued. "You're in the wrong office." "Oh my God," Layla groaned, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. The receptionist said third door on the left." She likely meant the third door on the left in the HR corridor, which is on the other side of the building. "Of course she did," Layla muttered. "I'll just go—" "My name." "There's Damien King," the man said. Layla froze, slowly lowering her hands from her face. "King? As in King Enterprises? Yes. I'm the soulless CEO who's never worked a day in his life." The blood drained from Layla's face. Of all the offices she could have wandered into, she had to pick the CEO's, and then insult him, to his face. "Mr. King, I am so sorry," she said, standing up quickly. "I had no idea who you were. Not that it would have been appropriate to say that about anyone, but especially not. I'm just going to go and die of embarrassment now." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Ms. Hart." Layla turned back, expecting to be reprimanded. "Or worse. Your interview," he said, holding up her resume. "I believe it was scheduled for 9:30. It's now almost 10. I don't appreciate tardiness." "I know, and I'm truly sorry. It won't happen again. Not that there will be an again, because obviously I've ruined any chance I had, but do you always talk this much when you're nervous?" he asked, the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. "Unfortunately, yes." "Interesting." He studied her resume for a moment. "It says here you were an accounting assistant at Burnham Financial for 3 years. Why did you leave?" Layla blinked in confusion. Was he actually interviewing her? "I was laid off. They downsized the department." Damien nodded. "And your responsibilities included?" Basic bookkeeping, client correspondence, scheduling, some data entry. You mentioned you make excellent coffee. How do you take yours?" "Black," she answered automatically, "no sugar." Something in his expression shifted slightly. "That's rare. Life's bitter," she said with a small smile. "Might as well get used to the taste." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Layla couldn't quite read the expression on Damien King's face. He looked intrigued. "The position you applied for is in our human resources department," he finally said. "But I find myself in need of an intern in the executive office. The hours would be longer, the work more demanding, but the pay would be better." Layla stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an interview for a different position right now. But I just insulted you. You were honest. That's rare in this building." He leaned back in his chair. "Most people who come into this office spend their time trying to impress me, telling me what they think I want to hear. You spoke your mind, not knowing who I was." "That wasn't speaking my mind, that was putting my foot in my mouth," Layla admitted. "Perhaps, but I found it refreshing." He gestured to the chair again. "Shall we continue the interview, Ms. Hart? Or would you prefer to try your luck with HR?" Layla hesitated for only a second before sitting back down. "I'd like to continue, Mr. King." "Good. Now tell me, what do you know about King Enterprises?" For the next 30 minutes, Damien King questioned Layla about her experience, her skills, and her knowledge of the company. Despite her rocky start, Layla found herself relaxing as the interview progressed. Damien was direct and thorough but not unkind. He seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When they were finished, he stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for your time, Miss Hart. My assistant will contact you with our decision by the end of the day." Layla shook his hand, noticing how warm it was despite his cool demeanor. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. King, and again, I apologize. For the mix-up and my unfortunate comment, your honesty is not unfortunate, Ms. Hart, it's valuable. As Layla left Damien's office, her heart was racing. Had that really just happened? Had she really called Damien King soulless to his face and somehow ended up being interviewed for a better position than the one she'd applied for? She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with a tall, elegant woman in the hallway. "Watch. Where you're going?" the woman snapped, looking Layla up and down with obvious disdain. "I'm sorry," Layla said, stepping aside. The woman gave her one last contemptuous glance before continuing down the hall and entering Damien's office without knocking. Back in his office, Damien was still holding Layla's resume when Victoria Blackwood walked in. "Damien, have you forgotten our meeting?" Victoria asked, her tone sharp. "Of course not," he replied, sliding the resume into a drawer. "I was just finishing up an interview." Victoria raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Since when do you conduct interviews personally?" "Since I found someone who isn't afraid to speak her mind." "How novel," Victoria said dryly. "Now, about the Carlton merger." As Victoria launched into business talk, Damien found his thoughts drifting back to Layla Hart. In the 10 years since he'd taken over King Enterprises, he'd made it a rule to keep his professional and personal lives completely separate. No office romances, no distractions, no complications. It was a rule that had served him well. Under his leadership, King Enterprises had grown into one of the most successful corporations in the country. He'd sacrificed a personal life for that success, and he'd never regretted it until today. Until a flustered woman with honest eyes and a burned skirt had walked into his office by mistake and called him soulless to his face. Layla Hart was exactly the kind of distraction he'd spent a decade avoiding. She was emotional, unpredictable, and completely unsuitable for the polished world of King Enterprises. And yet, as Victoria continued talking about profit margins and acquisition strategies, Damien found himself reaching for his phone. "James," he said when his assistant answered, "I want you to offer the executive intern position to Layla Hart. She'll start tomorrow." Victoria stopped mid-sentence, staring at him in disbelief. "Did you just hire someone without consulting HR?" "I did." "That's against company policy." "I make the policies, Victoria," Damien said coolly, "and I've decided to make an exception." As the day came to a close, Layla sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. The call from Damien King's assistant had come just as she was getting off the bus. She had the job. The pay was twice what she'd expected from the HR position, and she started tomorrow. It felt surreal, like a dream that might evaporate if she examined it too closely. She looked around her small apartment, at the past due bills on the counter and the nearly empty refrigerator. This job would change everything. She could pay her rent, buy groceries without counting every penny, maybe even start saving again. All because she'd gotten lost and wandered into the wrong office. All because, for some inexplicable reason, Damien King had seen something in her that was worth taking a chance on. As she prepared for bed that night, Layla couldn't stop thinking about those steel-grey eyes and the way they'd looked at her, not with the disdain she'd expected after her blunder, but with interest, with curiosity. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "He's your boss now, your very rich, very powerful, very off-limits boss." But as she drifted off to sleep, Layla couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring, and what it would be like to work closely with the man she'd so rashly called soulless. Little did she know that Damien King was lying awake in his penthouse across town, wondering the exact same thing. Layla arrived at King Enterprises 45 minutes early the next morning. After yesterday's disaster, she was determined to make a better second impression. She'd spent the evening researching the company and its CEO, reading everything she could find about Damien King. What she found surprised her. 10 years ago, when Damien was just 25, he'd inherited the company after his father's sudden death. Industry experts had predicted doom, saying he was too young and inexperienced. But against all odds, Damien had transformed King Enterprises from a mid-sized real estate firm into a global powerhouse. The business magazines praised his genius. The gossip columns, however, painted a different picture. Ice King, they called him, the man without a heart. In the decade since taking over the company, Damien had never been publicly linked with any woman. No relationships, no scandals, no distractions. Now Layla understood why he'd been so amused by her soulless CEO comment. It wasn't far from what the tabloids already said about him. "Good morning, Ms. Hart," a voice greeted her as she stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor. A slender man with kind eyes and a professional smile approached her. "I'm James. Wilson, Mr. King's personal assistant. We spoke on the phone yesterday." "Yes, hello," Layla said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Mr. King makes his own decisions," James replied with a slight smile. "Come, let me show you." Around. As they walked through the elegant hallways of the executive floor, James explained her duties. "As Mr. King's intern, you'll be working closely with both of us. You'll organize files, prepare reports, sit in on some meetings to take notes, and handle whatever tasks come up." "I can do that," Layla said confidently. "A word of advice," James added, lowering his voice. "Mr. King values punctuality above almost everything else. He has a strict schedule and expects everyone around him to respect it." "I understand. Yesterday was an exception, I promise." James nodded. "Also, don't take it personally if he seems distant. That's just how he is with everyone." They stopped in front of a small but well-appointed office. "This will be your workspace," James said. "Mr. King likes his team close by." Layla looked around the office with wide eyes. It was nicer than any place she'd ever worked, with a sleek computer, comfortable chair, and even a small window with a view of the city. "This is mine," she asked in disbelief. "For as long as you're here," James confirmed. "Now Mr. King will be arriving in exactly 15 minutes. He'll want his coffee ready when he gets here. Black, no sugar." "Just like mine," Layla murmured. "What was that?" "Nothing. Where's the coffee machine?" After James showed her the executive kitchen and a few other important locations, he left her to get settled. Layla spent the next 10 minutes organizing her desk and preparing herself mentally for her first real day working with Damien King. At precisely 8:00 a.m., the elevator doors opened and Damien stepped onto the floor. He looked even more imposing than yesterday, dressed in a dark suit that emphasized his tall, athletic frame. Layla quickly grabbed the coffee she'd prepared and met him halfway to his office. "Good morning, Mr. King," she said, holding out the cup. "Black, no sugar." Damien looked momentarily surprised before taking the coffee. "Thank you, Ms. Hart. You're early." "I didn't want to repeat yesterday's performance," she admitted. Something that might have been a smile flickered briefly across his face. "Wise decision. Come to my office in 5 minutes. We have a lot to cover today." Exactly 5 minutes later, Layla knocked on Damien's door, notebook in hand. "Enter," he called. Inside, Damien was already immersed in work, his fingers flying over his keyboard. Without looking up, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat. I'm just finishing an email." Layla sat quietly, taking the opportunity to observe him. In the harsh morning light, she could see the faint shadows under his eyes. Had he not slept well? She remembered her own restless night, thoughts of this man and this job keeping her awake. "Ms. Hart," Damien said, finally looking at her. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. I hired you because I believe you have potential, but this is a professional relationship. I expect excellence, punctuality, and discretion." "Of course," Layla nodded. "You'll have access to sensitive information about this company and about me. I need to know I can trust you." There was something in his tone that made Layla wonder if he'd been betrayed before. "You can trust me, Mr. King. I value loyalty above almost everything else." Damien studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good. Now, your first assignment." He pushed a thick folder across the desk. "These are potential properties for our next development project. I need you to organize them by profitability projection and environmental impact. James will show you how to access the database." "I'll get right on it," Layla said, taking the folder. "One more thing," Damien added as she stood to leave. "There's a board meeting this afternoon. I want you to attend and take notes." Layla's eyes widened. "The board meeting? Are you sure? It's only my first day." "It's the best way for you to understand how this company works," he said firmly. "Be prepared to observe and learn, not to speak." "I understand." As she turned to go, Damien spoke again. "Ms. Hart?" "Yes?" The coffee was perfect. It was such a small compliment, but it made Layla smile all the way back to her office. The morning passed quickly as Layla immersed herself in the property reports. The work was more complex than she'd expected, but she enjoyed the challenge. Around noon, James appeared at her door. "How's it going?" he asked. "Good," Layla said, looking up from her computer. "I think I'm getting the hang of the database." "Glad to hear it. I'm heading out to grab lunch. Can I bring you something?" "Oh, that's kind of you, but I brought a sandwich from home." James looked surprised. "Most of the executives order in from restaurants." "I'm not an executive," Layla reminded him with a smile. "Just an intern on a budget." After James left, Layla took her simple sandwich to the small kitchen area. As she was about to sit down, she noticed Damien standing by the coffee machine, frowning at it as if it had personally offended him. "Problem with the coffee?" she asked before she could stop herself. Damien looked up. "James usually makes it, but he's gone to lunch." Layla couldn't help but smile. Was the great Damien King, business genius, defeated by a coffee machine? "Would you like me to make it?" she offered. "If you don't mind." She moved to the machine and quickly went through the motions of brewing a fresh pot. "You know, for someone who drinks it black, you're very particular about your coffee." "I appreciate quality," he said simply. "So I've noticed." Layla gestured to the expensive furnishings around them. As the coffee brewed, an awkward silence fell between them. Layla, uncomfortable with silence, found herself speaking again. "I was reading about your company last night. It's impressive what you've accomplished in 10 years. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Research for the job?" "Partly also curiosity. You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? A soulless CEO who never worked a day in his life?" There was that hint of amusement again. Layla flushed. "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" "Unlikely." For a brief moment, Damien's stern expression softened into something that might almost be a smile. "What surprised you about me, Ms. Hart?" Layla considered the question as she poured his coffee. "How young you were when you took over the company. How successful you've been despite everyone doubting you." She handed him the cup. "And how you don't seem to have a life outside these walls." As soon as the words left her mouth, Layla regretted them. "I'm sorry, that was too personal," but Damien didn't seem offended. "Work is my life, Ms. Hart. I find it fulfilling." "No time for anything else?" "No one else?" His expression closed off. "This company demands all of my attention." "That's a choice I made long ago." Before Layla could respond, the kitchen door opened, and Victoria Blackwood walked in. She stopped short when she saw them standing close together by the coffee machine. "Damien?" she said coolly, her eyes flicking between them. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Just getting coffee," he replied, his professional mask back in place. "Victoria, this is Layla Hart, my new intern. Ms. Hart, Victoria Blackwood, our chief financial officer." "We've met," Victoria said dismissively. "In the hallway yesterday." "Nice to officially meet you, Ms. Blackwood," Layla said politely, extending her hand. Victoria looked at Layla's hand as if she'd offered her a dead fish, then turned back to Damien. "We need to talk about the presentation for the board meeting." "Of course," Damien said. "Thank you for the coffee, Ms. Hart." As he followed Victoria out, Layla couldn't help but notice how the woman placed her hand possessively on Damien's arm. There was clearly history there, and it made Layla uncomfortable in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. The board meeting that afternoon was intimidating. 12 stern-faced executives sat around a massive table, with Damien at the head. Layla sat in a corner, trying to be invisible as she took notes. Victoria presented financial projections with confident precision. Her tailored designer suit and perfect makeup made Layla acutely aware of her own modest outfit. When Victoria occasionally glanced in her direction, her eyes held unmistakable disdain. But it was Damien who commanded the room. When he spoke, everyone listened. His presentation was clear, concise, and compelling. Layla found herself impressed, not just by his business acumen, but by the genuine passion in his voice when he talked about the company's future. This was not a man who'd inherited a company and was simply going through the motions. This was someone who truly cared about his work. Halfway through the meeting, the boardroom door opened and a distinguished older man walked in. The effect on the room was immediate. Conversations stopped, and even Damien seemed to tense up. "Alexander," Damien said, his voice carefully neutral, "we weren't expecting you." "I still own shares in this company," the older man replied as he took a seat. "I like to check in occasionally." Layla realized this must be Alexander King, Damien's uncle and his father's brother. She'd read about him last night. He had run the company temporarily after Damien's father died, until Damien was ready to take over. According to the articles, the transition hadn't been smooth. As the meeting continued, Alexander asked pointed questions that seemed designed to undermine Damien's authority. The tension in the room was palpable. When they finally finished, Layla followed Damien back to his office, still taking notes on his instructions for follow-up tasks. She couldn't help but notice how his shoulders had tensed during his interaction with his uncle. "Is everything all right, Mr. King?" she asked hesitantly. Damien looked at her sharply. "Why wouldn't it be?" "No reason. You just seemed tense in there." For a moment, Damien was silent, and Layla worried she'd overstepped again. Then he sighed. "My uncle believes he should be running this company. He was my father's CFO for 20 years, and he expected to take over permanently when my father died. But your father left the company to you." "Yes. Alexander has never forgiven either of us for that decision." Layla was surprised by his candor. It was the most personal information he'd shared all day. "Family businesses are complicated," she said gently. "My parents owned a small restaurant, and even that created enough drama to fill a soap opera." "Owned? Past tense?" Layla nodded. "They lost it during the financial crisis. It nearly broke them. That's why—" She hesitated. "Why what? Why I need this job so badly. I've been helping them financially since I was in college." Damien studied her with new interest. "That explains your determination. You're not just supporting yourself. Family comes first," Layla said simply. "Always." Something in Damien's expression shifted. "Not always, Miss Hart. Sometimes family is the first to betray you." Before she could respond, his phone rang. He turned away to answer it, effectively ending their conversation. By the time Layla left the office that evening, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Her first day had been intense, but she'd survived. More than that, she felt like she'd somehow connected with Damien King on a level deeper than just boss and employee. As she waited for the bus, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You did well today. The coffee was excellent. DK." Layla stared at the message in disbelief. Damien King had texted her. How did he even get her number? Probably from her employment file, she realized. Still, the fact that he'd reached out personally made her heart beat a little faster. She typed back a simple "thank you," not wanting to seem too eager or familiar. 3 dots appeared, indicating he was typing, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, a new message arrived. "There's an important client meeting tomorrow. Be prepared to stay late." More professional, less personal. Layla told herself not to be disappointed. This was a job, not a date. Damien King was her boss, not her friend. She needed to remember that. But as she rode the bus home, Layla couldn't stop thinking about those brief moments when Damien's guard had dropped. The almost smile when she'd made his coffee. The vulnerability when he'd mentioned his uncle. There was more to Damien King than the Ice King persona he showed to the world. And despite her best intentions, Layla found herself wanting to discover more. Meanwhile, in his penthouse apartment, Damien stared at his phone, wondering what had possessed him to text his new intern. It was unprofessional and completely out of character. Yet something about Layla Hart kept breaking through his carefully constructed walls. He'd hired her on impulse, intrigued by her honesty and her lack of pretense. Now, after just one day, he found himself sharing personal information with her about his family, something he never did with employees. It was dangerous, distracting, exactly what he'd spent the last decade avoiding. His phone rang and Victoria's name appeared on the screen. He should answer it. Victoria was safe, familiar territory. She understood the boundaries of their relationship. Occasional, companionship with no emotional entanglements. Instead, he let the call go to voicemail and poured himself a drink. Tomorrow, he decided, He would keep his distance from Layla Hart. He would be professional, detached, and focused solely on business. He would remember the rule that had served him well for 10 years. No distractions, no complications, no emotional entanglements. But as he looked out over the city lights, Damien couldn't stop thinking about warm brown eyes and a simple statement. Family comes first. Always. In his experience, that had never been true. But something in the way Layla had said it made him almost wish it could be. 2 weeks passed, and Layla settled into her role at King Enterprises. Each day brought new challenges, but she tackled them with determination. Damien was a demanding boss, exacting, perfectionist, and sometimes intimidating, but Layla found herself rising to meet his high standards. True to his private resolution, Damien had maintained a professional distance. Their conversations were strictly business, focused entirely on reports, meetings, and company matters. But Layla often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've lasted longer than I expected," James commented one morning as they prepared for a client meeting. "Most of Mr. King's interns quit within the first week." "Really? Why?" Layla asked, arranging presentation folders. James shrugged. "They find him too demanding, too cold. They can't handle the pressure." "He's not cold," Layla said without thinking. "He's just focused." James gave her a curious look. "You defend him a lot for someone who's only known him 2 weeks. Layla felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just stating facts. Damien, Mr. King, expects excellence because he gives excellence. I respect that." "I see," James said with a knowing smile that Layla chose to ignore. Later that day, Layla was rushing to deliver some urgent documents when she literally collided with Alexander King in the hallway. Papers scattered everywhere. "I'm so sorry, Mr. King," she gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the fallen documents. Alexander didn't help. He stood over her, observing with cold amusement. "You're Damien's new pet project, aren't you? The girl who wandered into the wrong office." Layla looked up, surprised. "You know about that." "I make it my business to know everything that happens in this company," Alexander said, "including my nephew's unusual hiring decisions." There was something unsettling about the way he emphasized the word unusual. Layla stood clutching the reorganized papers. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. King, these are urgent." "Tell me, Miss Hart," Alexander interrupted, "what exactly do you do for my nephew? Besides, fetching coffee and delivering papers." The implication was unmistakable, and Layla felt a flush of anger. "I work for Mr. King in a professional capacity, sir. If you want details about my job responsibilities, I suggest you ask him directly." Alexander's eyebrows rose at her boldness. "Interesting. He usually prefers his assistants submissive and agreeable." "I'm not his assistant," Layla corrected. "I'm his intern. And if you'll excuse me, I really need to deliver these." She walked away, heart pounding. Something about Alexander King made her deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't just his suggestive comments. It was the cold calculation in his eyes when he spoke. About Damien. When she entered Damien's office, she was still flustered from the encounter. "These are the contracts you asked for, Mr. King," she said, placing them on his desk. Damien looked up from his computer, his eyes narrowing as he took in her expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Layla said quickly. "Ms. Hart." His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. Layla sighed. "I ran into your uncle in the hallway, literally ran into him, actually." Damien's expression darkened. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing important." "Layla." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her stomach flip. "Tell me what he said." She hesitated, then relented. "He implied that I was hired for reasons other than my professional qualifications." Damien's jaw tightened. "I see." "It doesn't matter," Layla said quickly. "I know why I was hired, and I know I'm good at my job. I don't care what he thinks." For a long moment, Damien just looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "My uncle has been trying to undermine me since the day I took over this company," he said quietly. "He believes he was entitled to everything my father built. That's why he's still on the board. To keep an eye on you." Damien turned back to her. "To look for weaknesses, to wait for me to fail." Is that why? Layla began, then stopped herself. Why? What? Is that why you keep everyone at a distance? Why you've built these walls around yourself? The question was far too personal, and Layla immediately regretted it. But to her surprise, Damien didn't shut down or dismiss her. Partly, he admitted. When I took over, I was young, inexperienced. Everyone was waiting for me to make mistakes. Personal relationships became liabilities, so you decided to have none at all. Damien's eyes locked with hers. It was simpler that way. Something shifted in the air between them. The professional veneer cracked, revealing glimpses of the real people beneath their roles of boss and employee. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Victoria entered without waiting for a response, her eyes narrowing when she saw Layla standing close to Damien's desk. "Am I interrupting?" she asked coldly. "Not at all," Damien said, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Ms. Hart was just delivering the Carlton contracts." "I'll get back to work," Layla said, feeling Victoria's hostile gaze follow her as she left the office. Throughout the day, Layla couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Damien. For the first time, he'd opened up to her, showing her a glimpse of the man behind the CEO facade. It made her feel both privileged and confused. What did it mean that he'd shared something so personal with her? That evening, as she was preparing to leave, James stopped by her office. "There's a company event this weekend," he said, "a charity gala for the King Foundation. As part of the executive team, your presence is expected." "Me?" Layla asked in surprise. "But I'm just an intern." "Mr. King specifically added you to the list," James replied. "It's at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, Saturday at 8 p.m. Formal attire." After James left, Layla sat at her desk, panicking slightly. A formal charity gala? She had nothing appropriate to wear for such an event, and no money to buy anything. Plus, the thought of navigating a room full of wealthy executives and socialites was terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "James told you about the gala?" "Yes," she replied. "Are you sure you want me there?" "I have no experience with events like this." The response came quickly. "I want you there." 4 simple words, but they made Layla's heart race. She was still staring at the message when her phone rang. It was her mother. "Layla, sweetheart, how's the new job going?" her mother asked when she answered. "It's good, Mom. Really good. My boss is..." She paused, not sure how to describe. "Damien. He's challenging, but I'm learning a lot." "That's wonderful. Your father and I are so proud of you." Layla smiled, picturing her parents in their small house in the suburbs. After losing the restaurant, they'd downsized significantly, but they'd never lost their warmth or optimism. "Actually, Mom, I need some advice. There's a formal work event this weekend and I have nothing to wear." "Oh, that's exciting. What about that blue dress you wore to your cousin's wedding?" Layla grimaced. "It's a bit too casual. This is a black tie." "Charity gala." Her mother was silent for a moment. "You know, I still have my old evening gown from when your father and I used to go to the Restaurant Association galas. It's a bit vintage, but classic styles never really go out of fashion. Why don't you come over tomorrow and try it on?" It wasn't ideal, but it was better than showing up underdressed. "Thanks, Mom, I'll come by after work." The next evening, Layla stood in her parents' bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror. Her mother's dress was a deep emerald green, simple but elegant. It needed a few alterations, but with some quick work, it could be ready by Saturday. "You look beautiful, honey," her mother said, adjusting the fabric. "Just like I did when I was your age." "It's perfect, Mum. Thank you." As her mother pinned the alterations, Layla thought about Damien and what he might think when he saw her in this dress. Then she immediately scolded herself for caring. This was work, not a date. Damien King was her boss, not her, not anything else. But that night, as she lay in bed, Layla couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to dance with him, to be held in those strong arms, to see that rare, almost smile directed at her and only her. "Stop it," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "Don't be stupid." Saturday night arrived all too quickly. Layla spent hours getting ready, styling her hair in an elegant updo and applying her makeup with extra care. The altered dress fit perfectly, highlighting her figure without being too revealing. Her mother had also lent her a simple pearl necklace. that added just the right touch of sophistication. She couldn't afford a taxi to the Grand Metropolitan, so she took the bus, feeling slightly ridiculous in her formal gown among the regular Saturday night passengers. When she finally arrived at the hotel, she was awestruck by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and elegant floral arrangements adorned marble columns. The ballroom was already filled with people in expensive clothes, the women draped in jewels that probably cost more than Layla's yearly salary. She felt immediately out of place, like an imposter pretending to belong in this world of wealth and privilege. "You came," a familiar voice said behind her. Layla turned to find Damien standing there in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders. He looked even more handsome than usual, if that was possible. "Of course," she said, trying to sound professional despite the way her heart was racing. "You said my presence was expected." His eyes traveled over her, taking in the emerald dress and the simple pearl necklace. "You look different." "Different good or different bad?" she asked before she could stop herself. The corner of his mouth twitched in that almost smile. "Different good." Before Layla could respond, Victoria appeared at Damien's side, her hand sliding possessively through his arm. She wore a slinky red gown that must have cost thousands, with diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. "Damien, the mayor's waiting to speak with you," she said, barely acknowledging Layla's presence. "And the press wants photos." Of course, Damien nodded. To Layla, he added, "Enjoy the evening, Ms. Hart. We'll speak later." As Victoria led him away, Layla couldn't help but feel a stab of jealousy. Victoria fit so perfectly into this world, while Layla was clearly an outsider. For the next hour, Layla tried her best to blend in. She made small talk with James and a few other employees she recognized, sipped champagne that was probably worth more than her entire grocery budget, and watched Damien from a distance. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, speaking to important guests, posing for photos, and giving a short speech about the King Foundation's work. Not once did his professional mask slip. Not once did he show the hints of vulnerability he'd revealed to her in his office. Here he was every inch the powerful CEO, the Ice King the tabloids described. Layla was about to find a quiet corner to hide in when Alexander King approached her, 2 champagne glasses in hand. "Ms. Hart," he said smoothly, offering her one of the glasses. "You look lovely this evening. Quite a transformation from the office girl running into me in the hallway." Layla accepted the champagne warily. "Thank you, Mr. King. Please, call me Alexander. After all, we're not in the office now." There was something in his tone that put Layla on guard. She took a small sip of champagne to avoid having to respond. "I've been watching you," Alexander continued. "The way you look at my nephew. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Layla nearly choked on her champagne. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. Damien has always had a weakness for pretty faces, but he's never brought one of his little diversions to a company event before. "You must be special." "Mr. King, Alexander, I think you've misunderstood. Our relationship, it's purely professional." "Is it?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Then let me give you some friendly advice. Damien doesn't do relationships. To him, women are temporary amusements, nothing more. Just ask Victoria." Layla glanced across the room to where Victoria stood possessively close to Damien. "What about Victoria?" "They've had an arrangement for years. No strings, no commitments. She accepts it because she wants to be Mrs. Damien King so badly, she'll take whatever scraps of attention he offers." Alexander's smile was cruel. "Is that what you want, Ms. Hart? To be another Victoria?" Before Layla could respond, she felt a hand on her lower back. Damien had appeared beside her, his expression cold as he looked at his uncle. "Alexander," he said, his voice tight, "I see you've met Ms. Hart." "We were just having a delightful chat," Alexander replied smoothly. "Such a charming young woman. I can see why you've taken an interest." "Ms. Hart is a valued employee," Damien said firmly. "Nothing more." The words shouldn't have hurt. They were exactly what Layla had been telling Alexander, but coming from Damien, they felt like a slap. Nothing more. Of course she was nothing more to him. What had she been thinking? "If you'll excuse me," she said, setting down her champagne glass. "I need some air." She walked away quickly, heading for the terrace doors. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. She leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the city lights below. Stupid, she thought. So stupid to think there could ever be anything between them. He was Damien King, billionaire CEO. She was just an intern with a borrowed dress, hand costume jewelry. Layla. She turned to find Damien standing in the terrace doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You should go back inside, Mr. King," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your guests will be looking for you." "What did Alexander say to you?" he asked, moving closer. Nothing that wasn't true, apparently. She couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. "That I'm a valued employee, nothing more." Damien was silent for a moment, then, "What did you expect me to say?" "That I hired you because I couldn't stop thinking about you from the moment you walked into my office. That I've broken every rule I set for myself over the past decade because something about you makes it impossible to maintain my distance." Layla stared at him, her heart pounding. "Is that true?" Instead of answering, Damien took another step toward her. They were so close now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I told myself I was hiring you for your honesty, your work ethic," he said quietly. "But the truth is, I hired you because for the first time in 10 years I wanted something more than just business success. I wanted to know you." "Damien," she whispered, using his first name without thinking. He reached out, his fingers lightly touching her cheek. "This is a terrible idea. I'm your boss. There are a dozen reasons why I should walk away right now." "Then why aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because for once in my life I don't want to do the sensible thing." His eyes searched hers. "Tell me to go, Layla. Tell me this is wrong, and I'll walk back inside and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." She should tell him to go. It was the rational choice. But as she looked up into his eyes, Layla found she couldn't say the words. "I don't want you to go," she admitted. For a moment they stood frozen, teetering on the edge of something that would change everything. Then Damien's self-control finally broke. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was giving her one last chance to pull away. But when Layla wrapped her arms around his neck, responding with all the feelings she'd been trying to suppress, Damien deepened the kiss with a hunger that took her breath away. It was everything she'd secretly imagined and more. His arms around her felt like coming home, like something she'd been waiting for without knowing it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said softly. "I know. People. We'll talk." "I don't care," Layla said with sudden certainty. "Do you?" Damien pulled back slightly to look at her. "I've spent 10 years caring what people think, letting it dictate every decision I make. For once I want to do something just for me." His fingers traced the line of her jaw. "Something that makes me happy." "And I make you happy?" Layla asked, still hardly believing this was real. "You make me feel alive," he answered simply. "I hadn't realized how much I'd closed myself off until you crashed into my life." Layla smiled at his choice of words. "Literally crashed into your office. Best wrong turn anyone's ever made," he murmured, bending to kiss her again. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the terrace or heard the quiet click of a camera phone capturing their embrace. Alexander King smiled to himself as he slipped back into the ballroom. Finally, his nephew had shown a weakness, one that Alexander could exploit. Damien had built his reputation on being untouchable, focused solely on business. This little romance would damage that carefully crafted image, make shareholders nervous, create exactly the kind of distraction Damien had always avoided. As he scrolled through the photos he'd taken, Alexander's smile widened. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the Ice King had finally melted, and for a nobody intern no less, it was the opportunity Alexander had been waiting for, and he intended to make the most of it. The morning after the gala, Layla woke with a smile on her face. The memory of Damien's kiss, of his arms around her, felt like a dream, but it had been wonderfully real. After their moment on the terrace, they'd returned to the ballroom separately to avoid gossip. Damien had been immediately surrounded by important guests, but his eyes had found hers across the room several times, making her heart skip. When she'd finally left the gala, he'd texted her, "Dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us." She'd replied with a simple yes, trying not to seem too eager. Now, scrolling through her limited wardrobe for something suitable for a dinner date with a billionaire, Layla felt a flutter of anxiety. What was she getting herself into? Dating her boss, no, not just her boss, but one of the most powerful men in the city, was complicated at best, career suicide at worst. But when she remembered the way Damien had looked at her, the way he'd kissed her, all her doubts seemed insignificant. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ms. Hart." Victoria Blackwood's cold voice was unmistakable. "I think we need to talk." Layla's stomach dropped. "About what?" "Don't play innocent. I saw you with Damien last night." "I don't think that's any of your business," Layla replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "Oh, but it is. You see, Damien and I have an understanding, have had for years. He may occasionally amuse himself with others, but he always comes back to me." "That's not what he told me," Layla said, though doubt began to creep in. Alexander's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "They've had an arrangement for years." "Of course it isn't," Victoria said smoothly. "Damien knows exactly what to say to get what he wants. It's part of his charm." "Why are you calling me Ms. Blackwood?" "To give you friendly advice. Don't mistake a moment of passion for something meaningful. Damien doesn't do love or commitment. He's married to his company. The sooner you accept that, the less painful this will be for you." Before Layla could respond, Victoria hung up. Layla sat on the edge of her bed, Victoria's words swirling in her mind. Was it true? Was she just another diversion for Damien, something temporary until he got bored and went back to Victoria? She wanted to believe what he'd said on the terrace, that she made him feel alive, that he wanted to do something just for himself for once. But doubt was a powerful poison. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "Looking forward to tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. Layla stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to cancel, to protect herself from what might be a painful mistake. But another part, the part that had felt so right in Damien's arms, couldn't give up so easily. "See you then," she finally replied, pushing her doubts aside. She deserved this chance at happiness, didn't she? And if it ended badly, at least she'd know she'd been brave enough to try. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse, Damien was in an unusually good mood. For the first time in years, he felt light, almost happy. The memory of Layla in that emerald dress, of her soft lips against his, had kept him awake half the night, but in the best possible way. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was James. "Sir, you need to see this," his assistant said without preamble. "There's an article online about you and Ms. Hart." Damien felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What article?" "It's on the Business Insider website. Someone leaked photos from last night of you and Ms. Hart on the terrace." Damien immediately pulled up the website on his laptop. The headline made his blood run cold. "Ice King melts for intern. Damien King's office romance exposed." The article was brutal, suggesting Layla had slept her way into her position, questioning Damien's judgment, and implying that his decade-long focus on business was finally slipping. Bad news for shareholders. Worst of all were the photos, grainy but unmistakable images of him and Layla in an intimate embrace on the terrace. Only one person could have taken those photos and leaked them to the press. "Alexander," Damien muttered through clenched teeth. His phone rang again. This time it was his head of public relations in full crisis mode. "Mr. King, we need to issue a statement immediately. The stock is already starting to drop and board members are calling. This kind of publicity—" "I know," Damien cut her off. "Draft something and send it to me for approval." "Sir, with all due respect, we need to distance you from this." "Perhaps suggest the photos are misleading, that your relationship with Ms. Hart is purely professional." "No," Damien said firmly. "I won't deny what happened." But sir, I'll handle this my way. After ending the call, Damien sat back in his chair, thinking. His entire career, he'd made decisions based on what was best for the company, what would project the right image, what would please shareholders. Never once had he put his personal happiness first. Now faced with the choice between protecting his professional reputation and being honest about his feelings for Layla, Damien found himself at a crossroads. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Emergency board meeting called for 2 p.m. We need to discuss recent events and their impact on company image. Of course, Alexander had called a meeting. He was wasting no time in using this situation to undermine Damien's leadership. Damien texted James, "Find Ms. Hart. Have her meet me in my office immediately." Layla was still trying to decide where for her date with Damien when her phone rang again. This time it was James, his voice tense. "Ms. Hart, Mr. King needs to see you in his office right away." Something in his tone made Layla's stomach knot with anxiety. "Is everything okay? Just come as soon as possible." Layla threw on a simple blouse and skirt and rushed to catch a bus to the office. On the ride, she scrolled through her newsfeed and froze when she saw the headline and photos of her. And Damien. "Oh no," she whispered, her face growing hot with embarrassment and worry. By the time she arrived at King Enterprises, the lobby was buzzing with whispers that stopped abruptly when people saw her. The receptionist, who had always been coldly polite, couldn't even meet her eyes as she handed over the visitor badge. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless, with other passengers staring at her and murmuring behind their hands. Layla kept her gaze fixed on the floor numbers, willing herself not to cry. When she finally reached Damien's office, James gave her a sympathetic look. "He's waiting for you." Inside, Damien stood by the window, his back to the door. He turned. When she entered, his expression unreadable. "You've seen the article," he said. It wasn't a question. Layla nodded. "I'm so sorry, Damien. I never meant to cause problems for you or the company." "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "It's Alexander's. He took those photos. He leaked them to the press." "Why would he do that?" "To destabilize me. To make shareholders question my judgment." Damien ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon." Layla felt sick. "What are you going to do? That depends on you." "On me." "I don't understand." Damien moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "The PR team wants me to deny everything, to say the photos are misleading, that our relationship is purely professional." Layla's heart sank. Of course that's what he would do. That's what made the most sense. "I understand," she said quietly. "You need to protect the company." "That's what I've always done," Damien agreed. "For 10 years, I've put this company above everything, above any chance at a personal life, above my own happiness." He took her hands in his, surprising her. "But I don't want to do that anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to deny what happened between us. I don't want to pretend that kiss meant nothing." "Because it did mean something, Layla. It meant everything." Layla felt tears welling in her eyes. "But your company, your reputation, are important," he acknowledged. "But so are you. So is this. Whatever is happening between us." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood in the middle of his office, hands clasped at a crossroads neither had expected to face so soon. "There's something else you should know," Layla finally said. "Victoria called me this morning." Damien's expression darkened. "What did she want?" "To tell me about your arrangement. She said you always go back to her, that whatever is between us is just temporary." "That's not true," Damien said, his voice tight with anger. "Victoria and I had a casual relationship years ago, but it's been over for a long time. She refuses to accept that. So there's nothing between you now?" "Nothing. Romantic or physical, no. She's the CFO of my company and nothing more." He squeezed her hands gently. "What I feel for you, Layla, is something I haven't felt for anyone before, and it terrifies me, but I don't want to run from it." The intercom on Damien's desk buzzed. "Mr. King," James's voice came through. The board members are starting to arrive for the emergency meeting. Thank you, James, Damien replied, not taking his eyes off Layla. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. After James disconnected, Damien released Layla's hands with obvious reluctance. I have to go face them. What will you say? The truth. His voice was determined. That I'm tired of letting Alexander and the board control my personal life. That my relationship with you has nothing to do with my ability to run this company. And that if they have a problem with that, they can find themselves a new CEO. Layla gasped. You don't mean that. This company is your life. It was, Damien corrected her, but maybe it's time for that to change. Maybe there's more to life than quarterly reports and profit margins. Before she could respond, he bent down and kissed her, a brief, tender kiss that held the promise of more to come. Wait for me, he said softly. Whatever happens in that boardroom, I want to see you after. Layla nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As Damien walked out of his office, his shoulders straight and his head high, she felt a surge of both pride and fear. He was risking everything, his company, his reputation, everything he'd worked, for because of his feelings for her. Was she worth that risk? For the next 2 hours, Layla waited anxiously in Damien's office, too nervous to sit, pacing back and forth by the windows. The city spread out below her, people and cars moving about. Their normal day, unaware of the drama unfolding in the boardroom 40 floors above. Finally, the door opened. Damien walked in looking tired but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. What happened? Layla asked immediately. It was interesting. Damien loosened his tie. Alexander played his hand exactly as I expected. He questioned my judgment, suggested I was no longer focused on the company, implied that our relationship was inappropriate given your position. And the other board members? Were divided. Some agreed with Alexander, others defended me. He smiled slightly. James surprisingly spoke up quite forcefully on our behalf, said you were the most competent intern the company has ever had, and that our personal relationship hadn't affected your work performance in the slightest. That was kind of him, Layla said, making a mental note to thank James later. In the end, I made things simple for them, Damien continued. I offered them a choice, accept that my personal life is my own business as long as the company continues to thrive, or accept my resignation, effective immediately. Layla's eyes widened. You didn't. I did. What did they say? After some debate, they voted. Alexander and 2 others voted to accept my resignation. The rest voted to keep me on and issue a statement confirming their full confidence in my leadership. Relief washed over Layla. So you're still CEO? I am, Damien nodded. Though Alexander resigned from the board in protest, he stormed out threatening to sell all his shares. I'm sorry, Layla said sincerely. He's still your uncle, your family. Damien shook his head. Alexander stopped being family to me a long time ago. His resignation from the board is actually a relief. Now he can't undermine me from the inside anymore. And Victoria, she voted to keep me on, surprisingly, though she looked like she'd swallowed something bitter when I made it clear to everyone that you and I are together. Damien moved closer to Layla. If that's what you want, of course. What I want, Layla repeated. Damien, you just risked your entire company for me. The question is, are you sure that's what you want? He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. In the 10 years since I took over this company, I've never been more certain of anything. Layla looked into his eyes and saw truth there, and something else, something warm and real that made her heart swell. Then yes, she said softly, that's what I want too. Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if he never wanted to let go. I should warn you, he murmured against her hair. The press is going to have a field day with this. Ice. King melts for intern is probably just the beginning. Layla laughed despite herself. Well, it's not inaccurate. No, it's not, he agreed, pulling back to look at her. You did melt something in me, Layla Hart. Something I thought was frozen. Permanently. Your heart, she suggested teasingly. That's terribly cliché, Damien said, but his smile was tender. But yes, my heart. which it turns out still works after all these years of neglect. 6 months later, Layla stood in Damien's office, their office now since her promotion, to Director of Special Projects. The view of the city was the same, but everything else had changed. King Enterprises was thriving under Damien's continued leadership. After the initial shock of the office romance headlines had worn off, the press had moved on to other scandals, and shareholders had been reassured by the company's steady growth and innovation. Layla had worked hard to prove herself worthy of her new position, putting in long hours and bringing fresh ideas to the table. No one could claim she hadn't earned her promotion, not even Victoria, who had eventually accepted the new reality with cold professionalism. Alexander had indeed sold his shares and disappeared from their lives, though rumor had it he was trying to build a rival company. Damien seemed unconcerned, confident in the strength of what he had built, and what he had built extended beyond the company. In the months since that fateful board meeting, Damien and Layla's relationship had deepened into something neither of them had expected to find. For Layla, it was a love more real and solid than she'd ever known. For Damien, it was the family connection he'd been missing his entire life. "Ready to go?" Damien asked, entering the office with his jacket slung over his shoulder. "Your parents are expecting us at 7. Layla smiled. Her parents had been shocked when she'd first introduced them to Damien King, the billionaire CEO whose name they recognized from news headlines. But Damien had quickly won them over with his genuine interest in their restaurant stories and his obvious love for their daughter. Sunday dinners at her parents' modest home had become a regular tradition, one that Damien seemed to treasure as much as she did. "Almost ready," she replied, finishing an email. "Just confirming the details for the King Foundation's new scholarship program." Damien came to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "The one for children of small business owners who lost their businesses during economic downturns." "Yes," Layla nodded. "Inspired by my parents' story." "It's a good program," Damien said. "It will help a lot of families." Layla saved the email and stood, turning to face him. "For who would have thought that my getting lost and walking into the wrong office would lead to all of this? Best mistake anyone ever made," Damien said, echoing his words from the night of the gala. He pulled her close, his eyes serious suddenly. "Layla, there's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Layla's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "I had a whole speech prepared," Damien said, a rare nervousness in his voice. "About how you changed my life, how you showed me that there's more to living than just work and success. But I think you already know all of that." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "So I'll just ask, Layla Hart, will you marry me?" Tears of joy filled Layla's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." As Damien slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss, Layla couldn't help but think of that first day, running late, flustered, walking into the wrong office, insulting the CEO to his face. The interview that had changed everything. Sometimes, the best things in life happened because of mistakes, and this was the most beautiful mistake she'd ever made. Later that evening, as they sat around her parents' dining table, sharing the news of their engagement, Layla watched Damien laughing at one of her father's jokes. The Ice King was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to open his heart again, who had found a family to replace the one that had betrayed him, and Layla, who had once been desperate for any job at all, had found so much more than employment. She had found her place in the world, a love she hadn't been looking for, and a future brighter than she'd ever imagined, all because she'd knocked on the wrong door, all because, for once in his life, Damien King had been intrigued by honesty, rather than intimidated by it, all because of the interview that changed everything. The end